The Great Depression was one of the most tragic events that people in the United States have ever gone through. Since the economy collapsed in the late 1920s, the Depression had a powerful impact on family life, and being able to survive was a huge issue. People were earning 50 cents for hard labor work, and teenagers were kicked out of their families because they couldn't afford to feed another mouth. As a result, about 250,000 young people were homeless in the early years of the Depression. Many became nomads, traveling the highways and railways looking for work or adventure. With banks failing and businesses closing, more than 15 million Americans, 1/4 of the workforce, became unemployed, and families were unable to pay the mortgage, leading to the loss of their homes and farms. African Americans suffered more than whites, since their jobs were often taken away from them and given to whites. In 1930, 50% of blacks were unemployed. In Pennsylvania coalfields, 3 or 4 families crowded together in one-room shacks and lived on wild weeds. In Arkansas, families were found inhabiting caves. In Oakland, California, whole families lived in sewer pipes. Many of those that were desperate in need of shelter and food decided to go to jail just so they could be fed. To save money, families rejected medical and dental care. Many families sought to cope by planting gardens, canning food, buying used bread, and using cardboard and cotton for shoe soles. President Herbert Hoover declared, "Nobody is actually starving. The hobos are better fed than they have ever been." But in New York City in 1931, there were 20 known cases of starvation. In 1934, there were 110 deaths caused by hunger. There were so many accounts of people starving in New York that the West African nation of Cameroon sent $3.77 in relief.
The Depression forced couples to put off marriage and drove the birth rate below the replacement level for the first time in American history. The divorce rate fell simply because many couples could not afford to maintain separate households or pay legal fees. But rates of desertion rose sharply. By 1940, 1.5 million married women were living apart from their husbands. More than 200,000 vagrant children wandered the country as a result of the breakup of their families. Even though women were unemployed, women in the workforce rose slightly due to the desperate need of work during the Depression. Children took on more responsibilities, sometimes finding work when their parents could not. By the end of the Great Depression, President Roosevelt was known as a hero. He was the people's last hope of survival, so everybody looked up to him.
This nation will remain a neutral nation, but I cannot ask that every American remain neutral in thought as well. Even a neutral has a right to take account of facts. Even a neutral cannot be asked to close his mind or close his conscience. I have said not once, but many times, that I have seen war and that I hate war. I say that again and again. I hope the United States will keep out of this war.
However, it is uncertain as to how much Roosevelt's New Deal programs helped to end the Great Depression. By all accounts, the New Deal programs eased the hardships of the Great Depression, but the U.S. economy was still suffering by the end of the 1930s. The major turnaround for the U.S. economy occurred after the bombing of Pearl Harbor at the entrance of the United States into World War II. Once the U.S. was involved in the war, both people and industry became essential to the war effort. Weapons, artillery, ships, and airplanes were needed quickly. Men were trained to become soldiers, and the women were kept home front to keep the factories going. Food needed to be grown for both the home front and to send overseas. It was ultimately the entrance for the U.S. into World War II that ended the Great Depression in the United States.